Welcome to the Law School Toolbox podcast. Today we're talking about law school extracurriculars, all those things that you do not get graded for or paid for that you might still want to do. Your Law School Toolbox hosts are Allison Monahan, that's me, and Lee Burgess. We're here to demystify the law school and early legal career experience so that you'll be the best law student and lawyer you can be. Together, we're the co-creators of the Law School Toolbox, Bar Exam Toolbox, the Catapult Career Conference, and the Trebuchet Legal Career site. I also run the Girls Guide to Law School. If you enjoy the show, please leave a review on iTunes. And if you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out to us. You can reach us via the contact form on lawschooltoolbox.com, and we'd love to hear from you. And with that, let's get started.
Welcome back. Today we're talking about law school extracurricular activities. So first off, do law students really need to do extracurricular activities? Because isn't getting good grades really the most important thing and keep you plenty busy?
Well, I think that's a great question. I don't think it's like undergrad where, you're doing all of these extracurriculars because you want to apply to grad school or that kind of thing. But at the same time, I think there are some pretty valid reasons to do extracurricular activities. Sometimes people get really caught up in this grade thing and they're like studying 15 hours a day and that kind of thing. And I don't know. I kind of feel like that's a little bit of overkill for most people. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that the extracurricular activities really create some sort of a balance and get you out of the books, which I think can be a good thing for both your interest in the law. Like sometimes extracurriculars can get you excited about what you're studying, as well as they can be a good way to network with people. They can add some padding to your resume. Even if your grades aren't that great, extracurriculars can be really impressive, and they give you something to talk about in an interview, which is also nice. Like, what's more exciting to talk about, like what was discussed in your criminal procedure class or, this pro bono project you worked on as part of your clinic?
Right. And I think that's a great point. Yeah, of course, grades are really important and that should be your primary focus. But, we often encourage students to spend, say, 10% of their time thinking about jobs, and particularly your first year and even, to some extent your second year. These extracurriculars are really, they can be a very good sort of basis for getting a job because, the reality is if you go into an interview and there's just nothing on your resume, people have nothing to talk to you about.
Yeah.
So it's it's really painful if you get one of these resumes where it's like, I'm in the top 10% of my class. And that's it. Right. And you're like, okay, do you have any interest in anything that we could possibly have a conversation about? Mm-hmm. This goes back to our resume episode. There should be something that people can talk to you about on your resume. But, particularly if you're interested in going a certain direction in the law, I think these extracurriculars can be a really great way to sort of position yourself and make it at least appear that you're serious about it.
Mm-hmm. And I just think that so often, especially if you're getting down a bit in your law school experience, extracurriculars just create new excitement. And I was actually talking to someone who was studying for the bar, and he was talking about how volunteering at a legal aid office in law school really just reignited his passion for the law when he was even considering dropping out.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I did a lot of pro bono work my first semester, and it was this thing where you're like, you're so oh my gosh, is this really the right thing to do? It's so abstract. All we're doing is reading these boring cases. And then I would go to family court in the Bronx and be like, oh, wow, yeah, this is real life. This is what lawyers do. It's not... I think it can be a good counterpoint to, this sort of academic, ivory tower model of law school that people can kind of get sucked into if all you're doing is reading cases.
I think that's really true.
And it was just more interesting. It's you get a good story about the time you tried to get, everyone in the Bronx family court waiting room to do breathing exercises to calm down. And you're like, girl, what do you think you are? Some kind of California hippie? And I'm like, yes, actually, but it really works. Try it. Well, it's crazy because they put everyone together. When you're waiting for family court, everyone waits in the same giant room.
And family court is
pretty contentious.
Really contentious. Isn't it some crazy statistic? I think there's more violence against attorneys and judges in family court than in criminal court or places where they really think that there are more violent people.
Right. I don't doubt it. It's of course, if, people show up who are in this like sufficiently contentious family relationship that they need to go to court about it.
Yeah.
You probably should have like separate holding rooms for each side.
Yeah, especially like some of that stuff is about abuse and
yeah, and I mean, it's crazy. There'd be like kids everywhere and people are having these giant arguments, but like it was interesting. I mean, it got me out of like, the Columbia ivory tower for sure.
Exactly. So so this stuff is interesting, and you should do some research and, go to some info sessions and learn about what possible extracurriculars are available at your school. But we can run down kind of a list of the ones that, we think are some of the most common ones and what we know about them and if we've done them and if we think they are, worthwhile. So the first thing I know we both did was we were both on a law review.
Yeah, and I think that's, sort of the first question people have is, should I join the law review? Like, do I need to join the law review? Is my career over if I don't join the law review?
Right.
How do I join the law review? Which, if I can't join law review, which journal should I join? But I mean, let's kind of back up a second. Like, what is a law review?
Well, now I'm like double checking with myself, but I believe every ABA accredited school has to have a law review. Isn't that true?
Do they? I don't know. That's interesting.
I don't know. We should Google that. But I'm pretty sure that it's a requirement, which is why every school has one. But it's definitely a privilege to be on the law review, and every school can have their separate entrance requirements. My school, it was partly due to your grade and your standing in the class after the first year, and then you also had to do what was called a write-on, where you did a writing assignment, and those you got like a score for that and a score for your ranking, and you put those together, and then they took the top 45 people or whatever to join the law review. Different schools do it differently, but basically you produce a law journal. You take articles written by students, articles written by professors or practitioners. The law review board, which is of 3L students, pretty much puts together this publication. You do, I think we did 4 a year. Does that sound right?
Something along those lines. I think it probably varies. But yeah, I mean, basically it's a scholarly journal. And the weird thing about the law is we don't typically have peer-reviewed journals like they do in a lot of pretty much every other academic discipline, actually. So instead of professors editing articles and deciding what articles are going to go into the journals and that kind of thing, is actually students, which is a little crazy when you think about it. So, if you're on the board of a law review, you might be getting articles from like all these really prestigious professors all over the country, and your editorial board is the one deciding whether their work is going to be published.
Yeah, and there are times when you are editing very impressive people's work that is quite humbling, when I'm, literally making grammatical edits or suggestions about, form or how things are written to someone who way outranks me in the the grand scheme of academia.
Yeah, and I mean, sometimes you see articles and you're like, wow, this is not very well written, and this person is really famous.
Yep, it's very true.
It can definitely be an interesting experience.
And you end up doing assignments when you get on as a 2L. You do need to join as a 2L, but you end up doing a lot of assignments and checking citations and sources and things like that. It's a bit of grunt work.
I say a lot of grunt work.
It's a lot of grunt work.
a lot of hours spent in like the bowels of libraries that you never knew existed, and like weird locations on campus and things like that.
Yeah. And then I was on the board my third year. And so I did a lot of that managing of the editors as well as a lot of the editing of the assignments. And I think for me, law review was a very valuable experience because it did somewhat hone my writing craft. Nothing forces you to really judge your own writing than judging other people's writing, I think.
Right. Yeah, I mean, for me, like, I didn't know, and I mean, I was terrible at, like, blue booking and citations until I did law review, and then you get pretty good at it pretty quickly because that's all you're doing for a year.
Yeah.
Multiple hours a week, multiple times per week. It's good for that sort of thing. I mean, personally, I couldn't stand the law review, and I kind of hated every second I did it, but it was, I mean, basically, it definitely looks good on a resume, certainly for particular types of jobs. Like if you're interested in clerkships, for example, judges like really like to see law review. I mean, on balance, I guess it was like sort of worth doing, but I can't say that I particularly enjoyed it. So I decided not to apply for the board my third year, and I was I think I was the staff photographer and I wasn't social chair. That plum job went to someone else. I was the alumni liaison.
Nice. Nice.
meant I had to plan an alumni banquet, which was basically sort of like being social chair. So
wow. You do plan a good party. What can I say?
Yeah, I mean, my true talents came out. I was not cut out to do, detailed edits to professors' articles, but if you wanted to throw a good party, I was your girl.
Yeah. So I think if you're interested in law review, it's worth finding out what the requirements are for your school. Usually the write-on assignment is done after final exams. So that's
Although not always. I talked to someone yesterday who said that they had a blue booking competition in 3 weeks.
What?
Yeah, so by the time this episode comes out, she'll probably be doing the blue booking competition.
Oh my gosh. So that really means that you need to find out what the requirements are for your school so you can make sure that you plan for it. And, if it's during the year, you plan for it. But also if it's after the semester's over, you need to plan your summer schedule around spending a few more days doing the write-on.
Yeah, I made a bad mistake on that one because I started my summer job like maybe 2 or 3 days after finals ended. Thinking like, oh, no big deal. I'll just like do this other stuff. I'll do the writing competition in the evenings after I go to this job. Haha, yeah, right. It was really a terrible idea. Yeah. Really terrible. Because, I was actually a summer associate. And so what I hadn't counted on were kind of these parties and things that I was like, oh, they won't mind if I don't show up. It's like, oh, they will mind if you don't show up to like the opening party of the summer. They don't care. And so of course, like lip service, like, oh yeah, of course, we're happy to support your writing competition. We want you to join law review. But reality, it was like, it was a lot of late nights and, a lot more stress than I really needed at that point. I could have just started working like a week later and things probably would have been a lot easier.
Yeah, for sure. So,
and it made it even worse if you're like planning to go abroad or something, like you definitely just want to plan for that.
Yeah, do your homework now, find out what the requirements are.
And what if people don't think they're going to be able to get onto the law review? I mean, do they have other options?
Most schools have multiple journals. Oftentimes, for a specific subject area, like an environmental law journal or a law and technology journal. And I think that those are great to get involved in too. They're typically not as competitive as the law review, but they still give you some of the same experience and for jobs and clerkships and all of that kind of stuff. Having that journal experience is really what they're looking for. So I do think that working on a journal is valuable experience no matter what journal it is.
Yeah, and I think you can be smart about it. If you know that you want to put this on your resume, but you don't think you're competitive for the law review or you're just really not willing to commit that much time and energy to it, you can join a sort of less demanding journal and then you don't have to answer the question that inevitably is going to come up. And, if you're interviewing for a clerkship or whatever, it's like, why are you not doing a law journal?
Right.
You can be like, oh, I was really interested in this specialty journal in like, human rights or whatever. Although at Columbia, the Human Rights Journal was almost as demanding as the law review. And, most schools have sort of a hierarchy where some of them are more or less prestigious. Some of them are more or less work. I think it's valid if somebody, like, for example, my law school roommate who was the year below me, she was like, should I apply for the law review? And I'm like, why don't you just join the journal that you're actually interested in? Like, I know you don't want to do this,
Right.
So I think it's valid. If you have a good reason not to apply for the law review, I think it's totally valid. You just have to understand the trade-offs.
And actually, now I'm thinking about it, my second semester 1L year, I did some one-off work for a journal, which I think was a good introduction to my law review work.
Yeah, one of my other law school roommates did that too. There were certain journals that would take 1Ls, basically it's like to do the real grunt work.
Yeah.
But it was good because she got exposure to the whole experience. She got exposure to site checking. I think she actually ended up joining that journal ultimately in the end and was like on the board of it or something. So, it was a good opportunity if you're kind of curious about it or you really want to work on your citations.
Yeah, exactly. And attention to detail, which is incredibly important when you practice law or really in anything.
Yes. It is, I mean, as much as like people like to complain about law review, and trust me, I was definitely one of those people. It is, it does give you certain skills that you're just not going to develop otherwise because you are simply not going to spend that much time doing citations on your own.
Yep.
As being forced to do it, hundreds of hours over the course of a semester.
Yep.
And the other thing we should mention is, the more fun part of law review for a lot of people or law journals is you can actually write an article yourself.
Yeah.
So, you can write a note. You're probably going to be required to write a note if you're on the law review, and then some of them get published and some of them don't get published. So, if you're into that sort of thing, it could be kind of cool to, like, pick a topic you're interested in, maybe spread your knowledge to the world, that kind of thing.
Yeah. And even my school had a class that facilitated the writing of a note. It was actually it was taught by a professor who was actually the advisor of the law review, and almost everyone in the class was on the law review. But we used that class to develop our notes with this professor's help, and it was a great experience. And it was like a bit of a writing boot camp, but it was a really good class. So you never know. There may be classes, if you ask around school, that even help facilitate production of papers that could turn into notes or other articles.
Right, and most schools have a long writing requirement anyway, so you're probably going to have to do some sort of writing. And also, if depending on what you're applying for, you're going to need a writing sample. So, it's just a good thing to plan around. Plan on some sort of capstone writing assignment, whether it's for the law review note or some other sort of thing. Yeah. And oftentimes you could actually submit these papers to other journals or sometimes competitions. Yeah. And so that's another thing to look at. It doesn't have to be just at your school. You might be able to get broader exposure. We're always getting emails about hey, does, people need to write for the federal Indian law, whatever, competitions. If you have an interest in an area, you might be able to actually parlay that into some broader exposure, which is always good. Yeah. It looks awesome on your resume if you're I was the winner of this writing competition nationwide. That's going to attract attention.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you've already written it, so why not use it?
Exactly. Shop it around. Yeah. All right. What about moot court? Moot court differs typically from school to school. My school had a student-run moot court program. So although it had faculty advisors, moot court, which is where the 1Ls do appellate arguments and draft briefs, it was actually run by a student board with faculty advisors. So one of the kind of competing extracurriculars to do if you were doing well academically was to be on the moot court board.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think ours was basically just the second semester of legal writing.
Yeah, we had to do it as part of legal writing, second semester, but we had our final exam and then we had this month of moot court.
Yeah, I just remember we had to do an oral argument. That was about all I remember. Yeah. I actually, what I remember is having really bad laryngitis and being really concerned no one was going to be able to hear me. That's funny. Which might have helped my performance because I ended up getting the best oral argument.
Yeah. Mine was on this very bizarre fact pattern. And it was if someone who has a deadly disease intentionally bites your ear.
Oh, God.
If that is assault with a deadly weapon.
Wow. I mean, I would be yes, game over, move on. I'm guessing there's more to it than that.
There's a little more to it than that.
Yeah, God, I have no idea what ours was about. I think it might have been about, actually, what I think it was about may have been a bar question when I took the California bar. One of the MPTs was on the exact same thing I had done my moot court on. I think it was funny. Something, it was so, I couldn't believe it. I got the packet and was oh my God, I know all of this.
Oh my gosh, that's so funny.
It was something about employment law for it was public employees and what they could do or not do in their private time.
Yeah, I know that PT. Yeah.
Yeah, I took that one and that was my moot court question.
That's really funny. Yeah. So you never know.
That might be why I passed the bar.
Maybe. Thank you, moot court.
Yeah, because I was really able to skim through that law. I was nope, I know this the back of my hand.
Yeah. All right. So if you are also one of these folks who likes to be in academia, you can also be research assistants for professors. That's often a popular way to make some side money.
Definitely. Well, let's back up one more thing on moot court. There are also all these again, sort of national level moot court competitions.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
And certain schools are really into this type of thing. They're they always win. But this is worth looking into. If you're somebody who really wants to be a litigator and you want to hone your courtroom skills and that kind of thing, you have to do the one probably at your school, but you also probably have options on doing, some specialty moot court that's more national in scope. And I mean, that can be really exciting. Again, if you're a finalist or you win, that's pretty awesome.
Yep. And even, and my school had an Advocacy of the Year program. Advocates was an Advocate of the Year program where they would do a competition your 2L year that you could take a part in. And it was there was one person who won the whole thing. And yeah, that's a great for your resume just within the school, let alone moving on to a larger scale competition.
Yeah. And, it's this has to be something you're interested in. You can't just do it to put it on your resume. But if it is an area of interest, maybe law review is not the greatest fit because you really want to be in the courtroom,
Right.
think about different moot courts and things, or, other competitions. I think there's like ones for negotiation and
Yeah.
there are all these options that I'm not sure I was really aware of when I was in school. Anyway, back to being a research assistant.
Oh yeah, back to being a research assistant. So professors hire students to help them with all sorts of things because professors are supposed to be publishing. And so they need people to help them do that.
And typically they have a budget for those people.
Yeah, but they have a budget so you can get paid. And I think that I have known students to be research assistants both during the school year and even over the summer. So there are often a lot of opportunities. This is another great reason to get to know the professors that you are interested in knowing and do work that you're interested in. But also to keep your eye out if they're asking for applications. But I think a lot of times professors will just ask students they have relationships with if they want to be their research assistants.
Yeah, absolutely. And, obviously this is a great way to build a relationship. If you're interested in clerkships, fantastic for your references. You're going to need letters of reference. What better than a professor who's like, this person was incredibly helpful for my research on this topic. I couldn't have written this book without them. Mm-hmm. That's a pretty strong endorsement for a judge who's basically looking for someone who can do research for them.
Mm-hmm. So true. Yeah. Oh, and you know what? I'm looking at our list of things you can do in law school. We left off one is something you and I both did, which was to be TAs.
Oh, that's a great point. Yes. Absolutely. You can be a TA in law school. Totally forgot about that one.
Yeah. So that's also typically you're asked by either academic support or by individual professors to be a teaching assistant and kind of help out 1Ls on classes that you did well in. I did this for a number of semesters, and then I also was paid by the school to even do some private tutoring on the side as well. So it can be a great extracurricular, and also that looks great on your resume to say that you were a teaching assistant.
Yeah, and again, it allows you to build that relationship. So, if you slave away as a teaching assistant for someone, they're probably going to in turn write you a letter of recommendation.
Yeah, exactly.
And, because they know you better, they might be inclined to even pick up the phone and take that extra little step for you.
Yeah.
So anything you can do to kind of, build these relationships with your professors outside of class, I think is typically a good idea.
I agree. All right, we've talked a bit about pro bono work. Do you have anything else to talk about the importance of trying to do some pro bono work?
Well, I think it's just a great way to kind of practice being a lawyer. Mm-hmm. And as we talked about earlier, to get that perspective of people with actual problems in the world mm-hmm. beyond just they're not sure they're going to get an A on their law school exam.
Yeah.
And it's a great way to meet practicing lawyers because you're going to have to be supervised.
Yep.
So typically, if you're looking for mentors in an area, or just want to build some relationships with lawyers in the community, you're going to have somebody who's basically in charge of making sure you don't really screw this up.
Yep. Yeah, it's a very good point.
That being said, I think you have to be careful about the time commitments.
Right.
And sometimes things happen, in the real world at times where you're supposed to be in class or something like that. Mm-hmm. So you just have to understand that there may be this trade-off. And you have to be sure, you can't just, if you're doing pro bono work, you actually have a client,
right.
typically. So you can't just be like, oh, sorry, I have to go to contracts class.
Right.
That's not really, the judge is not going to be happy about that. So, you have to make sure that you actually have the bandwidth to be, and at the appropriate times to be able to do this. But, oftentimes you can get these sort of one-off projects, where they're not ongoing, where maybe you go down. I think I did one for people who'd been denied unemployment benefits, mm-hmm. So it was kind of one hearing and when the hearing is going to be and, you meet with your client the week before or whatever, and then you go at the specific time and then it's over.
Right.
Contrast that to a divorce case I did as a lawyer pro bono that dragged on for 3 years.
Right.
So you just have to be smart about what you're getting into, I think.
Yeah. So another thing that I actually think is a really great opportunity that people often overlook is just doing other things in your community that interest you. And I think law students really get caught up in the idea that everything that they do outside of going to class should be law related. And I think that that's kind of a mistake. I think that if you have other passions, especially that could be related to some sort of way to give back to your community, whether it be through community volunteer work or working as part of a charity or volunteering for a charity. I think you can meet a lot of really interesting people. You can expand your network just outside of your law school. You can oftentimes meet lawyers or business people that may even help you network or look for job opportunities. And I think it can just be a good thing to give back to the world at a time when you're kind of inherently selfish. That's not to say that, I think that's just part of the law school experience. It's a kind of an inherently selfish experience. And getting out and doing something else you care about, I think it's a really great reality check, but also just makes you feel good to give back to the community.
This doesn't have to be, again, like a huge ongoing commitment. It can be something as simple as like volunteering at a food bank for a few hours. Like I'm, a big supporter of the San Francisco Food Bank, and they're always happy to have people show up for 3 or 4 hours. And it's kind of fun. You're actually doing something physical. You're packing bags of rice, or you're like counting out oranges. And it's just like, whoa, this is like real stuff.
I actually have a friend who met her husband volunteering at the food bank doing just that.
Wow. Yeah. There you go.
I know.
I went once when the summer associates were at our law firm. They were like, oh, we'll do this activity instead of taking them to a fancy lunch. And it was really interesting because the other group that was there was a group of recovering addicts. And those are like, it was kind of interesting to see these people who were in law school, but they were summer associates, kind of reacting to that. Like, first they're like, oh my gosh, like these people are so crazy. But then, a few hours in, it's like everybody's friends. They're all joking, So I think it's a good eye opener for a lot of people too.
I think it is. And, also, like Allison was saying, even with the law review, that she got to plan a party and that was kind of a fun thing to do. I'm on the board of a nonprofit. We have like a gala coming up, and we're collecting people who want to, support the gala and volunteer for that. And I think in law school, even something like that could have been really fun, just to be creative and do something outside of the box. Again, you can have to check your time commitments, but it can be really nice to just get outside of the law school bubble a little bit and interact with other people.
Yeah, and sometimes even in the law school setting, you have the opportunity to do things like a little bit outside of the box, like plan parties or events. People often wonder about law student clubs. Like, do I need to join every club that I can possibly join? I mean, I did that my first semester. I can tell you, I don't think anyone cared. I mean, I had a lot of stuff to put on my resume. I think I was on the board of like 3 organizations.
Yeah.
But again, in the end, I, kind of stopped doing a lot of them because I didn't find them that useful. But I liked planning social events. And, so I was on the board as a 1L of like the Older, Wiser Law Students Association. And basically all that meant was that I planned a bar night like every other month, or I think I was on the board of the Entertainment Law Society too. And I think the real estate one as well, but and maybe like 2 others, but it was actually kind of nice because you could call up people that you wanted to meet and be like, hey, we'd really love to have you give a talk on this topic. And, again, like it's a way to build a relationship, but like I found that fun. Like I like planning stuff.
Yeah.
Or like the PILF, like the Public Interest Law Foundation always has a big gala every year. And, like I thought it was fun to like decide who was going to serve the food and pick out the cups and things like that. As Lee knows, like I love doing this stuff. But I think you just have to be, you have to sort of, I think it is, I don't think it's a bad thing to like get involved at school and join some clubs and things. But again, like you have to be cognizant of your time commitment.
Yeah, for sure. And sometimes, these organizations can, like you said, facilitate even networking. I mean, you and I have both spoken at events at law schools that are hosted by different clubs. And sometimes they
I think we hired someone from like, one of those type of events for a while.
We did. We also, you can often use their mentoring programs. A lot of clubs have mentoring programs that can help you get outlines and advice from 2Ls and 3Ls. It can be a nice way to meet upperclassmen. And a lot of people find that affinity groups can be particularly useful. And like I was on the board of Women in the Law and things like that.
Also, you have a lot of like ethnic and racial ones, like the BALSA, all the ALSAs as we call them. The Black Law Students Association, the like Asian American Law Students Association. I mean, there's probably one for just about anything you can imagine.
Yeah, and I think oftentimes a lot of people find that they can get social support or mentorship opportunities through those clubs, and that it's a really great way to add to their experience.
Yeah, and I think they can be a safe place too to talk about things that maybe you can't talk about quite so publicly necessarily.
That's a good point.
If you go to a social event with people who are kind of like your people, and suddenly everybody starts being like, "Oh yeah, like I've noticed that too." I think it's just it can be a safe place for people to kind of get some support, particularly if you're not the sort of like upper class white male paradigm of a law student.
Mm-hmm. A lot of law students maybe who did student government in undergrad are interested in doing student government in your law school or even a larger university.
Oh my gosh, I couldn't believe how competitive student. I mean, I guess it's not surprising, but I just remember because like I couldn't care less about student government ever. But I just remember like people were like, their campaign posters. They're like desecrating other people's campaign posters. Gosh. It was just like, are you joking? And then you realize, like, of course, like this is a population of people who go to law school. Yeah. It's people who are like really serious about student government.
But again, if you like that, that's great. But I did see student government take a huge amount of time from people. So, all this stuff is a balance. Like, I wouldn't try and do everything on this list that we're running through.
I think you have to pick and choose. Absolutely. Yeah. And, it depends on, like, what your tolerance is for certain things, too. Like, my tolerance for planning parties and, like, the details of that is very high. My tolerance for sitting through, like, a 4-hour student government meeting and then dealing with a lot of irate, like, group emails afterwards is basically nil.
Yeah.
So that was not going to be a good fit for me. Like, I'm happy to plan, the entertainment law gala. I'm not going to sit through a student government meeting. Yeah. No. But other people are totally different. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, I think ideally you want to do something, right?
Yeah, you just want to do something and make sure it just adds to your experience. And don't just feel like, well, I have to do this to check the box on my resume. Because if you don't enjoy it and you don't excel at it, I just don't think it's going to really be a benefit.
No, because ideally, with any of these things, you want to sort of work your way up. So, your first year, you kind of join, maybe not law review, but a lot of the other ones, you join, you get involved, and then your second and third year, by the third year, you want to be basically running it.
Yeah.
Because that's, A, it's more fun, and B, it looks better on your resume.
Yep. Very true.
I mean, there are other things you can do. Like, I know you gave tours or something.
I did. I would give tours or go to admitted student lunches and stuff like that.
Yeah, I think we hosted a bunch of admitted students. I had like 10 people sleeping on my floor.
Yeah.
Which in retrospect, I was like, why was I doing that? But
yeah, so that can be fun. It's a nice way to meet people in the administration of your school. If you like your school. If you don't like your school, maybe that's not a good fit.
Yeah, I think I got like an umbrella and like a nice tote bag out of it.
Yeah.
I mean, people, again, like, if you enjoy being social, great.
Yeah.
But I do remember it got really overwhelming at some point. I was like, I literally have 10 people. They're like, no one else will allow people to stay in their house. I was like, I would just send them my way. And then suddenly you're like, oh my God, we have 10 people sleeping in our apartment.
Oh my gosh. And then some people like to do sports for fun. So,
yeah, I wonder who those people are.
I don't know who those people are. They're not us. But
maybe a yoga club.
Yeah, the yoga club. I know. We should have, if we'd gone to law school together, we could have totally started a yoga club. But if you like that, sometimes schools have some leagues that you can join, or maybe in your community. I know I had friends who, played volleyball and did stuff like that just to be able to get out.
Yeah, I know people who completely love things like adult, I want to say daycare, but it's not daycare, like adult recess, where it's like a team that goes and plays like games you played when you were 5 as an adult. I'm like, if that helps you blow off steam, great. Or like adult kickball leagues.
Yeah.
I don't know. But yeah, like, in certain schools, this stuff is really popular. I know like UVA is famous for their beer softball games. Mm-hmm. And this might be a good point, to talk about school fit. Like, if these things sound horrible to you, maybe that school is not the best fit for you.
Yeah, it's a very
But if you're like, oh my God, I would love that, great. Yeah. But, ongoing exercise, meeting new people, sports, sporty things are always good for that kind of stuff.
For sure. And a lot of, even a lot of organizations sometimes will have student rates for things. I know that like my friends who run a CrossFit gym, they always have a student rate that law students will qualify for. So if there's stuff that you're interested in and you're worried about money, you should at least learn about it, because oftentimes they'll give students a break or create a payment plan or something like that, so you can still, participate in things.
Yeah, and I know, like, for me, the the university had really cheap gym classes that were actually good. So even though I'm laughing about, like, the idea of joining a league, I actually took all kinds of different classes, from belly dancing to squash, and loved all of them. So
yeah. All right. What about bar associations or national organizations like Ms. JD? Do you think these are a good use of your time?
Yeah, I think they can be. Again, like even getting involved in the bar association in your local community can be great. It's just a great way to meet lawyers. And then also, they have national level involvement. So you might join, the ABA's like student group or whatever it is, and basically, again, like you can work your way up in that until by the time you're a 3L, maybe you're on the board of that. Or, Miss JD, I think, has typically campus chapters. So you can get involved there. And then eventually, I know they have a conference typically, go to the conference. Again, like your school will often pay for these sort of things for you to go to a conference, which can be awesome. So I think just being aware of like these opportunities and getting involved with stuff can, particularly, after your first year, it can be really good.
Yeah. All right. With that, I think we are out of time. If you enjoyed this episode of the Law School Toolbox podcast, please take a second to leave a review and rating on iTunes. We would really appreciate it. And be sure to subscribe so you don't miss anything in the future. If you have any other questions or comments, please don't hesitate to reach out to us at lee@lawschooltoolbox.com or allison@lawschooltoolbox.com, or you can always contact us via the website contact form at lawschooltoolbox.com. Thanks for listening, and we'll talk soon.